Hello friends, in this video lecture we are going to learn about the brain and the cranial nerves. So first we'll study about the brain. Coming to the brain, which is a major portion of the central nervous system, which is present in the cranial cavity surrounded by cranial bones. And of course the brain regions are also named after the bones of cranium. And the brain, which it consists of 100 billions and trillions of neurons and neuroglia, which accounts for 1300 grams in adults. And it also has many synapses, thousands of synapses. And these synapses, which are larger than the number of stars in the galaxy. And of course this is the brain that is present inside our cranium. And what actually the brain consists of? An adult brain consists of four major parts. They are brainstem, cerebellum, dancephalon, and cerebrum. The brainstem, which is continuous with the spinal cord and consists of medulla oblongata, pons, and midbrain, whereas the posterior to the midbrain is called as cerebellum, and superior to the brainstem is called thalamus, hypothalamus, and epithalamus. And supported to the dancephalon and the brainstem is a structure called as cerebrum, the major and main part of the brain. Coming to the next part, protective coverings of the brain. Protective coverings that are present in the spinal cord are continuations of the protective coverings of the spinal cord. There are three cranial meninges. They are outer dura mater, middle arachnoid mater, and inner pia mater. The cranial dura mater, which is different from the spinal dura mater by means of layers. Cranial dura mater has two layers, whereas spinal dura mater has a single layer. The two dura layers in brain surrounds the brain, fuse it together, and separates the sinuses present in the brain. We call them as subdural spaces. Subdural spaces which has blood vessels into it, and there is no epidural space which is present in the spinal cord. There are three extensions of this particular dura mater in the brain. They are cerebral, flax cerebelli, and tentorium cerebelli. Flax cerebri are cerebral that separates the two hemispheres. Left and right hemispheres of the cerebellum. Means the right and left cerebrums are the left and right cerebrums are divided by means of a dura mater layer of the dura mater. We call them as flax cerebral. And flax cerebelli that separates the hemisphere into cerebellum into two hemispheres. And tentorium cerebelli, which it separates the cerebrum from cerebellum. So here you can see the different meninges and their structures. And brain blood flow and blood-brain barrier. The most important part of our brain, which protects the brain from external materials or external constituents like blood and its cells, and the constituents carried by the blood. So that is called as blood brain barrier which protects the pathogens, which was the brain from pathogens and harmful substances and harmful chemicals, which filters the blood. And the blood-brain barrier, which is consists of tight junctions of endothelial cells that seals together with the endothelial cells of blood brain capillaries, and those tight junctions are formed by means of the astrocytes. These astrocytes, which secretes the chemicals that maintains the permeability of the tight junctions. A few water soluble substances like glucose, creatinine, urea, and most of the ions cross blood brain barrier very slowly. And the proteins and most antibiotic drugs do not pass the blood brain barrier, whereas the lipid soluble substances, all lipid soluble substances, crosses the blood brain barrier very easily. So here is the structure of blood brain barrier. The green colored structures are called as astrocytes, and their cytoplasmic productions which surrounds the endothelial cells of the capillaries and forms the tight junctions with the endothelial cells. Thereby it permits the permeability of the blood from blood vessels to external environment of the brain. Coming to the cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid is the colorless fluid which protects brain and spinal cord from chemical and physical injuries. This cerebral spinal fluid, which is formed from the blood through which is crossed through the blood-brain barrier. It carries oxygen, glucose, and all other needed chemicals from the blood to the neurons and neuroglia. CSF, which is continuous, circulates through some structures, we call them as cavities, and spinal canal in the spinal cord, which are present in the subarachnoid space. And how it is, what are the functions of CSF? CSF helps in the mechanical production by means of shock absorbing shock, and the chemical production which it maintains the chemical environment of the neurons and circulation. CSF is a medium for minor exchange of nutrients and waste between blood and the nervous tissue. So these are the regions. Blue colored structures are the structures that stores and circulates the cerebrospinal fluid. We call them as ventricles. And CSF production. The CSF production, which is formed by means of choroid plexus. Choroid plexus are the network of blood capillaries that are present in the walls of the ventricles, which are formed, which are tightly joined to the ventricular walls by means of ependymal cells. These ependymal cells form the cerebrospinal fluid from blood plasma by filtration and secretion. This blood cerebrospinal fluid barriers permits certain substances to enter into the CSF. And how it is, how this particular cerebrospinal fluid is circulated means they are stored and circulated by means of ventricles, and the ventricles are of four. They are lateral ventricles, two lateral ventricles, one third ventricle, and one fourth ventricle. Lateral ventricles are present each hemisphere of the cerebrum. They are separated by means of a thin membrane called as septum pediculum. And the third ventricle, which is present in the midline of the hypothalamus between right and left halves of the thalamus. The fourth ventricle is present in the brainstem and between the cerebellum. Circulation. CSF is formed in the choroid plexus of each lateral ventricle and stored in the ventricles, which is flowed to the third ventricle through a opening called as interventricular foramina. Foramina means opening. Interventricular means between two ventricles of ventricles, that is lateral ventricles. And then fluid slowly goes into the aqueduct of midbrain. Aqueduct of midbrain, and then passes into the fourth ventricle. When it enters into the subarachnoid space, these three openings roof the present in the roof of the fourth ventricle. They are median aperture, lateral apertures, and each on one side. And gradually, the CSF is gradually reabsorbed into blood through arachnoid villi, a finger-like extensions of the arachnoid that project to the dural ventral sinuses. Coming to the structures of brainstem, the first one is pons. So here they are the ventricles. Here we can see the lateral ventricles that are present in the cerebrum. And the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata is the continuation part of the spinal cord, which is superior to the spinal cord. And this medulla, which extends, which comes out of the brain through a space called as foramen magnum. And coming to the pons, which consists of nuclei, which acts bridge between the brain and the spinal cord. The connections connect to the right and left sides of the cerebellum. The pons has two major structural components. We call them as regions. We call them as ventral region and dorsal region. Ventral region, which consists of a group of nuclei or a group of nuclei. Nuclei means a group of cell bodies on the brain. So the pons forms the Pontoni nuclei, and the dorsal region of the pons is the brainstem, which connects the is like the medulla and the midbrain. It contains ascending and descending tracts of the cranial nerves and other nuclei that puts pons the pneumotaxic area together with the medullary rhythmic area and pneumotaxic area and apneustic area, which helps in the control of breathing. So here is the internal anatomy of the medulla oblongata. Medulla oblongata, which consists of cranial nerves and their associations, and also the pons, which consists of the regions Pontine nuclei, which are the integrations of cerebrum, and cranial nerves. Midbrain, which consists, extends from the pons to the diaphragm. It consists of aqueduct, which is also called as fourth ventricle, and in the anterior to the midbrain there are cerebral peduncles, which are the tracts of cerebellum. They contain axons like corticospinal axons, corticopontine axons. Corticopontine axons means axons coming from pontine nuclei. Corticospinal axons means axons coming from spinal cord, and corticobulbar motor neurons, which are arised from the brain, which conduct nerve impulses from brain to spinal cord, medulla, and pons. And the posterior part, here we saw anterior part, and now we are studying about the posterior part. Posterior part is called as the tectum. Tectum has four elevations, two superior and two inferior. Two superior elevations are called as the superior colliculi, which helps in the reflex, which serves as the reflex centers for visual activities, and whereas the inferior elevations are called as inferior colliculi, which helps in the auditory pathways. The midbrain, which is also consists of a small black darkly pigmented structure called as substantia nigra, which helps in the muscle movements of our entire body. So this is the structure of midbrain. And the reticular formation. Reticular formation is the broad region of white matter and gray matter, which exhibit a net-like arrangement, is known as reticular formation. The neurons within the reticular formation have both ascending and descending functions. Ascending sensory and descending motor functions. So the reticular formation or the reticular activating system, which consists of sensory axons that protect the cerebral cortex. It mainly helps in the maintenance of consciousness, and it is active during awakening from sleep. The reticular formation's main descending function is to help the regulate uh, muscle tone. Coming to the cerebellum. Cerebellum is the leaf-like structure which is present posterior to the midbrain and inferior to the cerebrum. And the cerebral cortex, which consists of gray matter and a series of ridges called as folia. Deep to the gray matter, there are the tracts of white matter called as arbora vitae, means tree-like structures. The cerebellar nuclei are regions of gray matter that gives rise to axons carrying impulses from cerebellum to the other brain centers. Three paired cerebellar peduncles attach the cerebellum to the brainstem. Brainstem that to midbrain which consists of cerebellar peduncles. And as we already studied about tentorium cerebelli, which separates the cerebrum from cerebellum, and there is a constricted area called as vermis, and the particular vermis on either sides consists of cerebellar hemispheres. In each hemisphere consists of lobes separated by fissures. So here the white color structures are called as arbora vitae and the grooves are called as foliae. And coming to the next part of the brain is called as dancephalon. Dancephalon is a central part of the midbrain, a central part of the brain just superior to the midbrain. It is surrounded by cerebral hemispheres, both lateral left and right cerebral hemispheres, which has many nuclei which are integrated between the sensory and motor neurons and helps in the processing of sensory and motor neurons with the higher and lower brain centers. Dancephalon, which is projecting from the hypothalamus, is called as hypophysis, where we see a pituitary gland and optic tracts carrying the neurons from retina and enter into the regions of brain called as optic chiasma and all the structures that are present in the dancephalon. Coming to the thalamus, which is a group of nuclei which which is present between the right and left cerebral hemispheres. It acts as major relay station for most of the sensory impulses that reach primary sensory areas of cerebral cortex from the spinal cord. It helps in the transmission of information from cerebellum, basal ganglia, and primary motor area of the cerebral cortex. It has a major role in regulation of autonomic activities. And there are 7 major group of nuclei. Nuclei means a group of axons in the brain. So major nucleus 7. They are anterior, medial, lateral, ventral, and intralamellar, midline, and ventricular nucleus. The anterior nucleus, which connects the hypothalamus and limbic system. Medial connects the cerebral cortex, limbic system, and basal ganglia. Lateral group connects the superior colliculi of the pons and limbic system. And 5 other different parts constitutes the ventral group. And intralaminar nuclei, which connects the which makes the connections with the reticular formation, cerebellum, basal ganglia, and other areas of cerebral cortex. Midline nucleus forms the thin band which helps in the motor functions and olfactions. The reticular nucleus surrounds the lateral aspects of the thalamus. Here we can see the thalamus. They are all the medial, dorsal, lateral nuclei. And coming to the hypothalamus which consists of four major regions: mammillary region, tubular region, supraoptic region, and preoptic region. Tubular region is the widest part of the hypothalamus, which is stack-like structure. Mammillary region, which is the most posterior part of the hypothalamus. Tubular region is the widest part of the hypothalamus, which also has a stalk-like structure called as infundibulum. Supraoptic region, which is superior to the optic chiasm, and preoptic region, which consists of preoptic nuclei. So here are the structures of hypothalamus, which mainly controls the body activities and regulates the homeostasis of the body activities. Means it acts as a sensor for homeostatic activities in our body. Receives impulses from somatic and visceral senses. Receives impulses from vision, taste, and smell, etc. Epithalamus. Epithalamus is the superior part of the thalamic structure, and posterior to the thalamus consists of a pineal gland. Pineal gland is about a pea-sized structure which helps in the secretion of melatonin. And circumventral organs. Circumventral organs are the parts of diencephalon. Altogether, what you have studied till now, all together called as circumventral organs, which helps in the maintenance or coordination of the homeostatic activities of endocrine and nervous system. Coming to the cerebrum. Cerebrum is also called as seat of intelligence, which is a major part of the brain, and it is divided into two halves called as cerebral hemispheres, and it is separated by flux cerebri. The hemisphere consists of an outer rim of grey matter, an internal region of cerebral white matter and grey matter, and the folds of cerebrum are called as gyri or convolutions, and the deepest grooves are called as fissures. So here you can see the fissures and sulcus. The depressions are called as sulcus, and elevations are called as gyri, and the deep depressions are called as sulcus, and the grooves, the deep grooves are called as fissures. And coming to the lobes of cerebrum, it is divided into 5 lobes, and they are named by means of the bones present in the cranium. And the lobes are frontal lobe, parietal lobe, temporal lobe, occipital lobe, and the fifth one is insula. The central sulcus means the central deep groove which separates the frontal lobe from parietal lobe. So here the blue colored one and the brown colored one. Brown colored one is called as frontal lobe, and the blue colored indication is parietal lobe, and is separated by means of, here this is the frontal lobe and this is the parietal lobe, and these are separated by means of central sulcus. And precentral gyrus, the meningeal gyrus called as precentral gyrus, located anterior to the central sulcus, which consists of primary motor area, so here excuse me. So here is the precentral gyrus and this is the postcentral gyrus. So these precentral gyrus and postcentral gyruses, which has primary motor areas and primary somatosensory areas. and these are the higher centers of the brain, of course. And the lateral cerebral sulcus, or the fissure that separates the frontal lobe from temporal lobe, and the parieto-occipital sulcus separates the parietal lobe from occipital lobe. Here we can see the lateral sulcus and occipital, parieto-occipital sulcus. This is the parieto-occipital sulcus. This is the lateral sulcus which separates the frontal lobe and temporal lobe, and this is the parieto-occipital sulcus which separates the parietal lobe and occipital lobe. And coming to the cerebellar white matters. White matter means the axons of the neurons. And in the cerebrum, the white matter, which is present in the form of bundles of neurons, we call them as association tracts, commissural tracts, and projection tracts. Association tracts are the bundles of neurons, axons, which conduct impulses between gyri of same hemisphere. Means, so these are the two hemispheres. If they conduct or transmit impulses between neurons of the same hemispheres, they are called as association tracts. Commissural tracts means the nerve impulses carried between two hemispheres. These are all the commissural tracts. And the major tract is called as a corpus. And projection tracts are the tracts that coming from both the hemispheres in the downwards. We call them as projection tracts. So here you can see association tracts. These are the association tracts lines, and the green colored one called as commissural tracts, and the downward projecting tracts, they are called as projecting tracts. Basal ganglia are the nuclei that are present in the cerebral hemispheres. They are the three nuclei masses are called as basal ganglia. They are very important in the functioning, like our motor activities and the integration between thalamus and cerebrum. They are globus pallidus, two globus pallidus, and one putamen. Globus pallidus and putamen. Two are globus pallidus and putamen, and the third one is chordata nucleus. So here are the basal ganglia, which are indicated in blue, green, and red colors. Limbic system. The limbic system, which is present in the deeper regions of the cerebrum, which is present above the corpus callosum. They have the structures of limbic system are cingulate gyrus, parahippocampal gyrus, hippocampus, dentate gyrus, amygdala, septal nuclei, mammillary bodies, and two nuclei of thalamus, olfactory bulbs, etc. So this limbic system plays a major role in the emotional balance in our body. So this is also called as emotional brain, which maintains the pain, pleasure, docility, affection, and anger. It also involves in the olfaction and memory. So here we can see the functional areas of the brain. Functional areas of the brain. They are primary motor areas, premotor areas, primary gustatory areas, etc., etc. Now we are going to study all of them. Coming to the motor areas and sensory areas. Sensory areas, the sensory impulses arouse mainly from posterior half and both half of the both cerebral hemispheres. Motor areas located in the precentral gyrus of the frontal lobe. Primary somatosensory area. One of the major area is primary somatosensory area. Primary somatosensory area which maps the body, means whenever any stimulus that comes from any part of our body, that it locates the exact location of the stimulus coming from. So that is the primary somatosensory area. Broca's speech area, means which helps in the recognition of our speech and uh, helps in the recognition of our language and helps us to speak. That is present in the frontal lobe. So here you can see motor cortex, sensory cortex, visual cortex, and auditory cortex. In these areas we can see sensory areas, primary sensory areas. So first one is motor cortex. In the motor cortex, which is present in the precentral gyrus. In the precentral gyrus, we also see somatic motor association area. And the next one is gustatory cortex and olfactory cortex. Gustatory cortex helps in the sensing of taste. Olfactory cortex helps in the sensing of smell. Auditory cortex, which is present in the temporal lobe, which helps in the which has two areas, primary auditory area and primary association area, which helps in the sensing of voice or hearing. And sensory cortex, which is present in the postcentral gyrus, in the parietal lobe, which helps in the which has a somatic sensory association area, means which connects the different sensory impulses. Visual cortex, which is present in the occipital lobe, which consists of primary visual cortex and visual association area. Visual association area means this area which connects the eyes, sense of vision with different other neurons, which helps in the performing of actions like movement of our eyes, movement of our body parts in reaction to the vision that is coming from eyes. Coming to brain waves. Brain waves are the electrical impulses that are moving inside the brain. They are majorly beta, alpha, delta, theta, and gamma. These are all the 5 brain waves. So these are generated by neurons close to the brain surface, and these are recorded by means of an equipment called as electroencephalogram, EEG, which helps in the identification of disorders of brain. Coming to the beta waves which are which are present during awakened condition, normal alert consciousness, which brings out normal alert consciousness, whereas alpha waves, which gives us which are arise during the physical and mental relaxed state, and we will be these waves are occurs at early hours or the time during the time where we start to wake up. Delta waves are below 4 hertz, which are which are present in deep sleep, and usually they are absent during the awakening position. Theta waves. Theta waves are present. Theta waves comes during the reduced consciousness or deep meditation, where we see dreams, light sleep, and random eyeball movement sleep, REM sleep. Gamma waves. Gamma waves are 30 hertz and above. They are the highest waves, which are present during the heightened perception. And coming to the cranial nerves. In our brain, there are totally 12 pairs of cranial nerves, whereas spinal nerves are 31. Cranial nerves, because they are passed through the foramen of the brains of the cranium, so their name is cranial nerves. They have totally five mixed nerves and motor neurons. The motor neurons, which includes 3, 7, 9, and 10, and the sensory neurons remaining are the sensory neurons which are present. I mean, those sensory ganglions are the nuclei present in the brain. Coming to the first one, olfactory nerve. Olfactory nerve is entirely sensory, which it brings the impulses from olfactory epithelium, which is present in the cerebriform plate, and these nerves carries the information to the brain through olfactory bulbs to extensions of the brain that rest on the cerebriform plate, and the olfactory tracts which extends posteriorly from olfactory bulbs and present in the olfactory region of the brain. Optic nerves. Second one is called as optic nerve. Optic nerve is entirely sensory in function. In the retina, rods and cones which usually raises the impulses of visual impulses, they move through optic nerves and merge to form optic chiasm, and then they enters into the thalamus. Optic tracts ends in the lateral geniculate nucleus, means they are present in the thalamus. So here is the optic nerve. And oculomotor nerve, third nerve is called as oculomotor nerve, which is a motor cranial nerve which helps in the movement of eyeball. Oculomotor nerve extends and oculomotor nerve helps in the movement of extrinsic muscles like superior rectus muscles and levator palpebrae muscles, means which helps in the movement of up and down movements of eyeball, and at the same time the movements of our eyelid. The inferior branches which helps in the movement of eye into diagonal ways. And the fourth one is trochlear nerve. Trochlear is a motor nerve which is the smallest of all cranial nerves, originate from trochlear nucleus of the midbrain, which helps in the motor movement or movement of the eyeball, extrinsic muscles of the eyeball controlled by this trochlear nerve. And abducens nerve. Abducens nerve is also motor cranial nerve which originates from abducens nucleus in the pons. This somatic motor neuron axons extends from the nucleus of eyeball, muscles of eyeball, so which helps in the movement of eyeball. So totally oculomotor nerve and trochlear nerve helps in the movements of eyeball, and also another nerve also helps in the movement of eyeball, that is abducens. Next one is trigeminal nerve. Trigeminal nerve, which is a mixed nerve which consists of both sensory and motor areas. The trigeminal nerve has three branches. They are ophthalmic nerve, maxillary nerve, and mandibular nerve. Ophthalmic nerve, which is the smallest branch, passes into the orbit via superior orbital fissure, whereas the maxillary nerve, which is intermediate, passes to the maxilla, and mandibular nerve, which is the longest branch, formed through and passes through foramen ovale. So these are the three branches of the trigeminal nerve. So facial nerve is also a mixed cranial nerve which consists of sensory axons and motor axons. Sensory axons extends from the taste buds, which helps in the taste, and branchial motor neurons, which arises from the temporal bone, facial, scalp, and neck muscles. So these are the two branches of the So these are the, usually it consists of 5 branches. The nerve muscles, which also helps in the impulses, carrying impulses to facial muscles. So here is the facial nerve, which helps in the expression, maintenance of our expression, smile, etc. Vestibulocochlear nerve, usually it is called as auditory nerve, but it has another function called as vestibular function, which helps in the maintenance of our balance. So it has a sensory, it is only sensory, and it has 2 branches, vestibular branch and cochlear branch. Vagus nerve. Vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve, which is most important cranial nerve, which is a mixed nerve, which consists of somatic and motor neurons. Somatic axons, which enters into the skin of the external ear, few taste buds, and proprioceptors of the neck and throat muscles. And somatic motor neurons, which arises from the nuclei of medulla oblongata and enters into the pharynx, larynx, and soft palate that are present, that are used in swallowing and vocalization. The axons of autonomic neurons, which are also present in the vagus nerve, parasympathetic and sympathetic neurons that are also present in the vagus nerve. Usually, parasympathetic nerves will be present in the vagus nerve. These helps in the, these are innervated to the stomach, gallbladder, and respiratory center, respirations, and even heart. So this vagus nerve plays a major role in the maintenance of homeostasis, autonomic homeostasis. So these are the organs that are innervated by vagus nerve. So next, 11th one is accessory nerve. Accessory nerve is a mixed cranial nerve which consists of both sensory and motor regions. So these particular mixed motor axons, this axillary nerve, which helps in the excuse me. So cranial portion of this particular axillary nerve is a part of vagus nerve, and the motor axons rise from anterior gray horn and the first 5 segments of the cervical portion of spinal cord, and it conveys the impulses to the muscles of head and helps in the movement of head. Hypoglossal nerve is the 12th motor cranial nerve. So this is a only motor nerve which helps in the movement of our tongue muscles and the motor nerves which helps in the movement of tongue, and the sensory nerves which arises from the tongue which helps in the sensing of taste. So by this we have completed brain and cranial nerves. Thank you.